I'm Cynthia from the Natural Food Foundation. What would you say is the difference between an indigenous garden and a normal garden? The main thing is really that it seems to relax people at a very deep level, and it has great potential for decreasing the violence and the sense of dissociation that we have in urban areas. All plants are for the decrease of violence, but because indigenous, let me say, when I mean indigenous plants, I mean plants endemic to a specific area that naturally occur there. There's a sense of belonging that comes with it. So if there's a plant that's, for example, not indigenous, you're much more likely to notice it, because the indigenous plants almost form a backdrop. And the fragrance and everything comes with that area. I know lots of people that go and walk, and part of the whole experience isn't just the walking and the beauty of nature, it's also inhaling it. So you actually use all the senses in an indigenous garden, and in all gardens really. But an indigenous garden is more restful because your eye moves almost over it. It doesn't stop you all the time. So there aren't too many distracting focal points. And of course you can increase if you want a more dramatic garden. There are ways of increasing through your design the focal aspects. But it's generally a much more restful, it's almost as though it forms part of the landscape. And the earth and nature and rocks are all very healing to us. And being part of that environment makes us relax at a very deep level. It de-stresses us more so than the colour and the fragrance of exotic plants, which are very beautiful and more striking, but it's as though they arrest our attention more. What we've tried to do in the past is, or how this originally started, was by trying to create landscape gardens in the townships, so that you wouldn't have these dusty sidewalks. People could design their own gardens. So if you had, for example, a creche, you would have more ground covers and maybe some climbing trees. If you had a clinic which wanted an indigenous food garden, you would have more shade trees and benches for people waiting. So the idea is that a garden should really suit your lifestyle. It doesn't have to do something just because it's indigenous and it's in, or because it's less effort to maintain. It must be something that appeals to you. So you will find that very often people actually combine the veggies that they normally like with the indigenous food plants. I do have a list of some of these plants. It's not exhaustive. There are many more plants than I have. I've got one of about 70 for the Eastern Cape and of about 25 for the Cape Town area. A very common one is the sour fig. Then there's one that's not endemic to here, but that's grown quite widely. That's the nim with the beautiful white flowers and the thorns, and we call it Natal plum as well. Red fruit, some sort of pendulate and some are quite pointy. They're very tasty. What you find as you move from east to west across the country, in the east you have more leafy plants, and as you come more towards the Cape area and to the dry areas, you get more root plants that are being used. A lot of the plants that used to be known in the Cape Town area aren't really being used as food plants anymore. What you find is a lot of people from the Eastern Cape are here, and they tend to know the plants from the Eastern Cape, not really the local indigenous plants. But the other plants like inkberries, there are these yellow daisy bushes that also have an edible berry, not a very tasty edible berry, but edible berry. You also find if you eat indigenous foods, you tend to need far less food to be satisfied. So it's just as though it has more life force and more nutrition, and somehow you just don't need the volume because you actually feed. And different people, different cultures have very different approaches to gardening. If you think of that typical African pattern, which is putting the stones around, for example, a bed or a tree or something, and then sweeping everything in between. Now, it may not make sense to you, but actually what it does, it keeps the pests away. And the stones actually harbour things like lizards and chameleons that eat the pests. So people always have a reason for doing things. And the idea isn't to scrap what people know and come in with what your idea is. The idea is always to find out where they're coming from and working with that. For example, pumpkins and beans and maize was traditionally grown together as the three sister crops. Now, although they're not indigenous, they are actually excellent companion plants. And they may not know the technical reason that legumes give more nitrogen and all that sort of thing, but they know that it works. So they already have a concept of companion planting. So you always try to work on what people know through songs and stories or just cultural traditions.